Well, thank you, Paola and Ernesto, and thanks to the Department of City and Regional Planning of Cornell University for this invitation. I will share my screen, and as well, Ernesto said, of course, there are space for Q&As at the end, but most of all, I will end this presentation with some questions for you, and I hope we can search for answers and proposals for improving this agenda in this along this conversation. So I will share my screen. I was just saying that we will talk a bit about the new urban agenda, its implementation up to now, about some figures on Latin America and the Caribbean, the baseline. I would like to share with you also a bit about the methodological design for the elaboration of this report and preliminary findings, progress, setbacks, and omissions on the implementation of the new urban agenda. What others say, specifically taking in reference the Quito Manifest and other sectors, what they say about the agenda in the region. And finally, challenges and actions for change. Next, Paola. Okay, so as I was mentioned, the new urban agenda was adopted at the United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development, Habitat 3 in Quito, in Ecuador in 2016. It was endorsed by the United Nations General Assembly at its 68th plenary meeting of the 71st session in December 2016. The new urban agenda represents a shared vision for a better and more sustainable future. And the main message is that if well planned and well managed, urbanization can be a powerful tool for sustainable development for both developing and developed countries. You can find more information on the agenda as such in this link. Next. So quickly, before we enter into the implementation of the new urban agenda, I think it's important to go back and to see a bit the history of this long process that concretized on this agenda 5 years ago. In 1972, it was the Environment Summer in Stockholm, and at that summit, or let's say that summit was the first global meeting in which political and public awareness on environmental issues was made. And one of the conclusions of that summit was to, or somehow include the political mandate to hold the first ever conference on human settlement. That conference happened in 1976, Habitat 1 in Vancouver. And one of the, let's say, good results of the Habitat First conference in Vancouver was the fact that for the first time in history, human geography was included in the reflection on the development of human settlements. Also, the meeting somehow promote the creation of ministries of housing and urban development at global level, because at that time very few countries had public institutions related to the management of urban issues at national level. It also defined the creation of the UN Habitat Center for Human Settlement in Nairobi, that later in 2002 transformed into the global program that we know today, which is UN Habitat. And another very positive result of this global meeting was the fact that many of the entities and even professionals, urban planners, architects, engineers, economists, sociologists, anthropologists, etc., that participated in this meeting create a global housing international coalition that put together the civil society and different entities somehow engage with urban issues at global level. After Vancouver 1976, Habitat First is not uh, I didn't include it here, but I'm sure you remember that in 1992 there was the Rio Summit on environmental issues, and as part of the reflection of on that summit, one of the results was to have a second global meeting on urban issues after the first one that was in 1976 in Vancouver, and this second meeting, Habitat 2, it was held in Istanbul, in Istanbul, and again, the positive result of this global reflection on how human settlements were developing was the fact that the human geography was included in these 20 years. In the urban reflections, many ministries of housing were created at global level. The UN Center on Human Settlement was actually functioning in Nairobi, and the civil society still had an important participation on urban issues. Additionally to this, I think it's important to remember that in 1996, adequate housing was recognized as a key element of the declaration, and also there was a design of a strategy for monitoring the development of human settlement was created through the identification of best practices at global level, and I might say that practice that continued for many years and still in UN Habitat as a way of identifying and monitoring one of the ways of identifying and monitoring the development of human settlements and urban issues. In 2000, the Millennium Development Goals were adopted with 7 goals, 18 targets, and 40 indicators. Among these goals, the goal 7 is related to sustainable environment, and the target 9, 10, and 11 are specifically related to urban issues. And I might say that the important milestone somehow of the Millennium Development Goals is the fact that for the first time in history, a global agenda was directly linked with the previous urban declarations. In 2015, many things happened inside the UN system, I might say, and one of the key things was the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is kind of a second version or a best version of the Millennium Development Goals. It included 17 goals, 167 targets, and 200 indicators. The goal 11, it's directly linked with the new urban agenda. The new urban agenda was adopted in 2016. It has 176 commitments. It was somehow the result of a long previous work on 21 issue papers and policy papers. And also, it was somehow also the result of a long work in each of the regional, in each of the regions on creating a baseline, regional baseline on urban issues that were somehow led by the economic commissions. In the case of Latin America, the regional report for the new urban agenda was elaborated by the Economic Commission of Latin America. And so that kind of global baseline was also an important input for the political negotiations in Quito during the somehow the design and later the adoption of the new urban agenda. Together with the new urban agenda in 2015-16, regional plans, here you can see it, regional plan action plans were created. First, a general regional action plan, and then specific ones, one for the Caribbean, for the sub-region, and very recently, one for Central America. Next. On the implementation, we will talk later about it because there are some voids on the implementation, unfortunately, in the new urban agenda, but also it's an opportunity. UN Habitat has created a site and many guidelines for supporting its implementation. You can find all the information on this link. Basically, what have been done in this last 3-4 years are the elaboration of guidelines for voluntary local reviews and for national local reviews that are addressed to cities and national governments, precisely to report on the implementation of the agenda. I might say also that an attempt of the elaboration of MNE dispositive was made about 2-3 years ago. It was called Action Framework for Implementation of the New Urban Agenda, but unfortunately, that dispositive is not complete. It was not adopted. It's still, let's say, ongoing. It's a working process, and in parallel to that, UN Habitat also created the CPI, which is a prosperity index on urban issues that was extensively, I might say, implemented in Mexico, in more than 200 cities in Mexico and in some other countries around the world, but is not formally recognized as a dispositive for monitoring the implementation of the agenda. In addition, each economic commission, regional level, have created urban platforms. This is the urban platform from Latin America. This is the link, which is kind of a repository where it's in a very free and open way. It's an open data space. National government and subnational entities and different sectors can add information on urban policies, urban programs, legislation norms, and specific programs that should subnational level. And it's a way somehow to put together all the urban information and let's see, the urban process, mostly led by the public sector in the region. Next. Now, I do like to, for the ones that are not too familiar with Latin America and the Caribbean, very quickly, I would like to tell you about this region. LAC and LAC cities tend to be less poor in this, let's say, if we look at a 20 years period, but it's more unequal and violent, ranking among the most unequal and violent cities globally. So if someone asked me, how you can describe the region in 2 words, I would say inequality and violence. Those are the two key characteristics of this region, and also I might say a very weak governance system that somehow blocked any strong intention of moving forward with this agenda, and not only. Since 1990, the number of cities between 300,000 and 500 inhabitants and between 1 and 5 million inhabitants has doubled, giving rise to new urban forms. There are also a number of emerging cities between 100,000 and 2 million inhabitants, with population and economic growth rates higher than the national average, where, among others, some international organizations have concentrated investments. Next. In terms of population, I think it's important to have in mind that in this region, what we observe is an increase in the number of female heads of household. If we compare 1919 with 23% of household, we'll see an important increase today with more than 35%. The same, we observe the same for older people. This is a region that is somehow living a late demographic transition process, of course, with huge differences among subregions. But what is important to have in mind is that in 2030, urban older adults will reach a figure of more than 80 million. Of this, only 35 million are covered by a pension system. So we will be basically older unprotected population very soon. We also observe an increase in extended families in the lowest quintiles and single-person households in the highest one. This is important for housing policy design. So this is why I included in these slides. In terms of intra-regional migration, we observed, comparing to previous years, relevant variations in its direction, intensity, and composition, with a huge flow of population coming from Haiti and Venezuela to the South Cone, and in relative terms, less population trying to migrate to United States via Central America. From the gender perspective, 50% of women in the region work in the informal sector. More than 76% of the population is not affiliated to pension system. 48% of the population is not affiliated to health system. This is important now because of the pandemic, of course. 53% of the urban population works in the informal sector. The housing deficit affects more than 40% of households. It's close to 50 million, giving rise to precarious settlements that agglomerates more than 110 million people. 25% of the region's urban households. 11% of the urban population still lack of access to basic services. This is about more than 52 million people, and 6% lack of access to improved drinking water. 28 million people. 190,000 households in the region are affected annually by climate change, of course, with hot spots in the Caribbean and Central America. Next. I want to tell you a bit about the methodology for elaboration of this report, and most of all for the implementation of the agenda in these last 4 years. As you know, the agenda is structured in 5, let's say, main issues, which are this. One is transformative commitments that are related to the objectives of the main objectives of the agenda: poverty and social inclusion, urban prosperity, environment, and climate change. The second big chapter, it's related to effective implementation, subdividing governance and planning. And somehow effective implementation is a representation of the concrete process that are pushed by government and other sectors to implement the agenda, and are related to urban data and the elaboration of urban policies, integration of urban policies, resource mobilization, metropolitan governance, tackling urban violences and conflict resolution, emergency governance, and the new urban agenda in LAC as such, and also about more physical interventions related to urban planning. So eco-territorial development, planned city expansions and infields, regeneration, climate change and disaster planning, and so on. The third big area of the new urban agenda is related to the means of implementation, basically money and the support given by the UN system, and especially by UN Habitat and the Economic Regional Commission to different entities for implementing the agenda. There's a fourth chapter on the agenda related to monitoring and evaluation, as I mentioned before, and cross-cutting issues. Next. This is let's say schematically how I designed the elaboration of this report. It's based on focus group, semi-structured interviews addressed to different sectors, and on the revision of literature. And this is because one of the very initial requirements on this project that started about 3 months ago, it was first to have the voice of different sectors. This is not, let's say, an UN Habitat self-centered report on the implementation of the agenda, but it has to have the voice of different sectors. And what we did with the team that I thank you. Some of them are in the presentation here in the meeting today online. Is that we already have developed more than 72 interviews, semi-structured interviews addressed to these different sectors. As you see, UN Habitat, it's one of the entities that we have interviewed. And one also interesting thing to share is that we divide the region in sub-regions. So we have, let's say, a regional analysis of literature and regional interviews, but then we divide the region in sub-regions. And so we're working in specific areas, Cuba, the Caribbean, Mexico, Central America, the Andean arc that comprises Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, the Southern Cone, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, and Chile, and Brazil. Some of you at the beginning, and some colleagues also asked me why this subdivision of the region, and because now, if you see, there are countries that are isolated, that are somehow a sub-region as such. And it's because first we respect the division that we used while we elaborate the regional report in 2015, so that you have information that could be comparable at the end of the process. And also because, for instance, Cuba is a country, very particular country that have received special attention from UN Habitat. So we consider that that criteria was important for this subdivision. Other criteria considered in this analysis were the size of the country or the region, and some cultural aspects as well. Next. So a bit about the preliminary findings and setbacks and omissions after this first, let's say, run of interviews and literature review. On transformative commitments, we could say that the two areas of greatest consolidation and development are related to inclusion and poverty elimination, environment, and climate change. And the area of urban prosperity shows a lag with respect to the previous areas. Not even the shift in priorities imposed by sanitary distancing and mobility restriction triggered innovative policies in productive development at the neighborhood scale. Global production and consumption change were and continue to be strongly affected by the pandemic. On effective implementation, the region shows substantive progress in developing or updating more integrated urban policies. We see effectively that many countries have even start or update their urban policies in these last 5 years. In terms of means of implementation, there's also significant progress has been made in the development of methodologies, information systems, and data platforms, as I mentioned before, that facilitate the implementation of the new urban agenda, in addition to existing document and mechanism. On reporting and monitoring, 3 countries in the region produce voluntary national implementation reports on the new urban agenda: Cuba, with, as I mentioned, with great support of UN Habitat, Mexico, and Colombia. In addition, a number of cities. Next. Now, as I mentioned before, through our semi-structured interviews, we ask different entities and sectors how you see the new urban agenda, what are the strengths and the let's say weaknesses of it, and the opportunities they see on the agenda. And so these were the more let's say reiterative answers. The new urban agenda does not prioritize according to existing urban typologies of region. In general terms, what the interviewers said was that, of course, this is a very diverse region. So the main, let's say, message it was that the new urban agenda is too general for the region. We also observe a strong lack of awareness of the new urban agenda in local governance. While developing these 72 interviews, the last question of these interviews were if they know any, if they knew any local government or mayor that knew or that mentioned, with familiarity the new urban agenda. And let's say 90% of the interviews answered that the new urban agenda was not known, or was very little known at sub-regional level, and basically because the argument is that mayors focus on day-to-day urgencies and actions that guarantee votes. There's also, we observe a little understanding of the interaction between global agendas at this national level. I mean, what our perception is that the new urban agenda is considered kind of a second-class agenda, and the one that it's well known is the SDG agenda, probably because of communication program and diffusion much stronger than the one that the new urban agenda has. The new urban agenda, it's considered unclear, and also many complaints were made regarding the fact that it doesn't include clear indicators for its monitoring. The regional action plans that were created right after the adoption of the new urban agenda, as mentioned before, were a very clear start for the implementation of the new urban agenda, but somehow were abandoned, except the one of Central America that was just created. Also, the interview said that mentioned that there's a lot of clarity on the implementation mechanism. In fact, more than one person mentioned that the implementation mechanism were not clear. There's an unperceived added value on the implementation at the urban scale of the agenda, and the new urban agenda is considered obsolete in post-COVID reality. Next. Okay, finally, I would like to somehow discuss with you, these are the testimonies that we gathered through the interviews and the focus meetings, and also looking at the literature and considering the critics made to the agenda in 2016 in Quito, by a different group of entities of the civil society, that at the end of the meeting, in parallel to the adoption of the new urban agenda, they elaborate the Quito Declaration, and of course the, let's say, takeaways that I can highlight from this process is that um, definitely this is the new urban agenda. It's a great uh, somehow, let's say, it's a great political commitment, but it lacks of a clear and recognized mechanism for its implementation. And even if there are some dispositive that can guide today its implementation, it's still very weak and unclear. There's not a monitoring dispositive, including indicators for it. And so somehow I can say that that it's a good start in political terms, because it was hard, the negotiation of the agenda, but in operative terms, I think there's a lot to do. Um, Even recognizing what these have done up to now. So from the information that we gather, these are the questions that I would like to discuss with you this evening, and are the following. So, how to recognize the power of bottom up in the new urban agenda? One of the demands of the different interviews is, um, and also one of the recognitions is that 70 of 80% of the urban processes in Latin America are informal. And the urban agenda has a formal language, a language that fits well within the UN system. So, how to recognize those, uh, let's say, informal urban processes, customary urban processes that are very much in line, many of them with the principles of the new urban agenda, but cannot be somehow included as implementation processes, precisely because the huge gap between, uh, let's say, the language, the colloquial language, and the UN system language. The second question is, how does it mean to implement the new urban agenda? How could the new urban agenda regain political strength? As I told you, the global agendas compete each other, and of course, the 2030 agenda, it's much stronger and much known than the new urban agenda. What should be the role of the mayors? Not only after the pandemic, but which is a period where, let's say, the territorial issues are more important than ever, but also for implementing this agenda that has a very strong territorial approach. Is the political timing of implementation important? This is a question related to the, let's say, the the path of the urban processes. Many of us urban planners think that reporting urban processes every 4 years is too short. It's too short time. It should be longer. The action framework for implementation of the new urban agenda and the city prosperity index, should we retake this instrument for the monitoring of the new urban agenda, on how we do it? And finally, on the pandemic, how to move from local responses to public goods. Thank you. So this is